Gunner states, my 1911-22 does not feed or fire. This is a Sig Sauer 1911-22. Looks like it's had some custom work done, including Cerakote in this nice maroon color. The Cerakote looks to be laid on a little thick, which may be a good place to start in searching for why this gun's not working correctly. Through functional and visual inspection, we notice a couple different things. One, it looks like one of the assembly pins has been put in backwards, which has deformed the pinholes, as well as the set screw for the rear sight looks like it's been over tightened and deformed on the rear side of the aluminum slide. And if we look at the bolt, which lies right underneath, we can see a marking from that screw right on top of the firing pin. This is most likely the cause of all the issues with this firearm, but this gun will go back to the gunsmiths for a full evaluation, including an assessment of cost for the customer. And we will be back with the update on that, and we will see what happens with this one. Gunner states, the latch for the floor plate on my bolt action has broken. This is a pretty straightforward job. It's not an investigation. We know it's wrong. The latch snapped. Now, this is a Harrington Richardson 300-301 Ultra rifle. This gun was built back in the 70s using an FN Mauser action, but been completely spoilerized. They're a fairly rare gun, and so the first thing that we must do is go on the search for the part. We called and looked at almost every parts distributor in the country, and nobody showed it. And upon calling them, they said that this is a very, very common parts breakage and that they get the requests for this part a lot, but nobody reproduces it. So the next step for this gun is it goes back to gunsmithing for a full disassembly to extract all the broken parts of the latch, and then we will evaluate on manufacturing the part from scratch. Gunner states, my pump 22 long rifle is not ejecting or firing reliably. Here we have an extremely rare Marlin 25 pump action. Don't see these guns very often, and in good condition, they do go for a decent amount of money. This customer claims that he is having a difficulty with this gun extracting the cartridge, as well as inconsistency in firing. So first thing we're going to do is take a look and do a simple visual and functional evaluation, see if there's anything that jumps out as an obvious problem. And here, everything seems to be working right externally. Looks like it's been refinished on the outside. Somebody did a pretty good job. Internally, the barrel's a little bit rough, but nothing that would point to malfunction. So the next step is to take it out to the field and get it test fired and see if we can duplicate what the customer is talking about. Gunner states, the latch on my bolt action rifle floor plate has broken. This is the same gun from a previous video. This is the Harrington Richardson 300-301 Ultra rifle, and these guns were prone to floor plate latch breakages, just like this one. These latches were made out of pot aluminum, very poor quality, and under the heavy recoil of this gun, they just wear out. It turns out nobody reproduces this part, therefore, we are going to have to produce one from scratch. So here we've extracted all the parts. We are designing a full reproduction part. Now, reproducing a part like this can get very expensive if you're not doing large quantities. So this one-off small parts production sometimes is cost prohibitive to the customer because it may start rivaling the cost of the firearm itself. But next steps on this gun is to get a price for the customer to see if he wants to greenlight the work, and hopefully he does. I'd like to see this one done. Gunner states, my 22 rifle will not extract or fire reliably. If you remember from an earlier video, this is the Marlin Model 25 slide action, a fairly rare gun. After our test fire, have found that it is only to be about 50% reliable on both firing as well as extracting. One of the first things we're going to take a look at is the firing pin. We do have free movement on that, albeit the firing pin does look a little worn. This is the original one. It is striking at least some of the time. Could be the cause of our failures to fire. Next, we need to find out why this is not extracting. And on further evaluation of the extractor itself, we have a significant amount of up and down movement. That extractor is held in by a set screw, which looks like it has been messed with and worn itself. This is almost for sure the cause of the fail to extract. So we will look for a replacement screw so that that extractor is held tight and will extract reliably. Gunner states, my 22 revolver is having random resistance when shooting. This is an older high standard Sentinel revolver and 22 long rifle. This gun looks like it has had quite a bit of use, but not terribly taken care of. Now, these guns were prone to different action issues, but overall are fairly durable guns and usually not too hard to fix. So first things first, we're going to do a simple visual and functional evaluation to see if anything obvious pops out that may be causing this issue. And one thing becomes really obvious is that it is missing the ejector return spring. And if this customer is experiencing some resistance on trigger pull in double action, it could be caused by this because there's nothing to hold it to the front. So if that ejector moves out a little bit while firing, it can cause friction. So that's the first thing that we're going to look at fixing. Get a new return spring in there, get that functioning properly, and then test fire to see if it cures the issue. Gunner states, I'm having a dead trigger issue on my CZ-P01. This is a CZ-P01 Omega 9mm pistol, and this customer is having an issue with his trigger going dead randomly. We have investigated this a little bit already, and we have found this to be not a common issue, but an issue that's been noted online is that the decock lever through pin is coming loose from the right side lever, which is essentially working itself off and causing the trigger disconnect or the dead trigger. Now, some of the solutions we found, number one, possibly CZ warranty work, where we send it back to the factory and let them figure it out. Number two, a quick fix that's been suggested is modifying the through pin so that it gives the right side lever a tighter fit that could possibly fix the issue. So next steps for this gun is to go back to the gunsmiths to figure out which avenue we're going to go to remedy this gun. Gunner states, I want an upgraded trigger in my H&K pistol. This is a H&K USP tactical model 9mm. And while this should be a fairly simple trigger upgrade, almost immediately we have run into some issues. Now, these trigger kits are very specific to the exact model and action of USP. And quickly we realized that the trigger components provided by the customer were not quite correct. The control latch that was provided with the trigger kit is not the correct one for this pistol. So we contacted the part supplier and we ordered the new latch. As we wait for that to arrive, we'll move on to the next job, and when that comes in, we'll quickly get this installed and give you guys an update. Gunner states, the trigger in my carry gun sucks. So this is a Glock 43X, and there's a lot of public debate on how good the triggers are in a factory Glock. This customer says his sucks, so we're going to look at replacing it with a much better quality trigger pull option. Now, when you're changing triggers in a carry gun, you have to consider a few things. One, durability and reliability. There are some good triggers out there that give you a fantastic trigger pull, but tend to fall apart over time. But when guys are looking for Glock trigger upgrades specifically for carry guns, we usually recommend the Apex enhancement kits. These have been probably the most consistently durable while giving the customer a massive upgrade in trigger pull. So for this one, it's pretty straightforward. We're going to disassemble this gun, get it installed, and get it back to the customer's hands as fast as possible. Gunner states, the front sight on my 1911 is broken and I need a new one. This is a gorgeous Wesson heirloom 1911. It's polished slide and engraved from the factory, but the brass bead on the front sight did come out and the customer wants a factory style sight replaced. So while normally sight replacements are fairly straightforward and maybe not worthy of a video, this one's a little bit unique in the fact that it is such a polished engraved high-end slide. We have to be extra careful not to damage anything. So these sights are set screwed in place and the damaged sight is going to have to be carefully removed, and the new one is going to have to be fitted just right to prevent any damage, but also prevent it from sliding out on its own. So, albeit a fairly simple job, it does take an extra level of care and precision to get this one right, and this will be a fun one to see all done. Gunner states, my AK dust cover is extremely difficult to remove. Now, this is a Zastava M70 underfolder AK, and this one hails from Yugoslavia. And this customer is saying that his dust cover is oddly difficult to remove and install. Customer is also stating that his action is sluggish and rough. So first thing we're going to do is an initial evaluation. We're going to look over externally and see if there is anything obvious that may be hanging up the dust cover or the action. We're going to cycle the carrier and look internally as well to see if anything pops out that may be causing these problems right up front. On initial inspection, nothing seems to be out of the ordinary, although the dust cover does seem to be more difficult than necessary to remove and install, but there's nothing obvious that is causing that issue. So the next step is this gun goes back to the gunsmiths. They will disassemble, look closer at those issues, and come up with possible remedies. Gunner states, I can't get any magazines to fit in my AK-47. This is a Romanian Wasser 10 imported by Century Arms, perhaps the most common imported AK over the last 20 years here into the States. And albeit very good guns, they are pretty crudely modified for import purposes into the US, and that includes magazine fitment. When this customer brought this in, we tried several different magazines from different companies, both polymer and steel in the gun, and couldn't get any of them to lock up properly. AK magazines can vary greatly as far as tolerances and fitment. Sometimes it takes a qualified gunsmith to get in there and modify the internals so that a wide array of magazines will fit and work in the gun. And it seems like that's exactly what needs to happen here. Next steps, it's going to go back to the gunsmiths for modification so that we can fit some magazines and get this customer out to the range. Gunner states, my 1911-22 does not feed or fire. Now this is the follow-up video. If you haven't seen the original video that states the problem with these guns, go back and watch it. But essentially this gun had a deformed pin in the top of the slide that was contacting the firing pin and causing all the issues with this gun. Now to remedy this, our gunsmiths went in and machined down that pin and slide so that we would have smooth function and free movement on all the parts. And it is complete. It is ready for final test fire and then release back to the customer. Gunner states, the trigger on my Glock sucks. Now this is the follow-up video to our original video that the customer wanted to replace his factory trigger with an aftermarket trigger for carry. We went ahead with the Apex trigger. We usually choose these triggers for carry upgrades on Glocks because not only do they improve the trigger pull greatly, but they're also very, very durable and reliable. So as you can see, the trigger shoe or the actual trigger itself is a much different design than the factory Glock trigger. And this gives a much more predictable take up, a solid wall with less creep than the factory trigger, and most notably, a very tactile and audible reset. So overall, these are things that people look for in a high quality carry trigger. And now this customer is good to carry confidently. Gunner states, I can't get any magazines to fit in my AK. Now, this is a follow-up video of the Wasser 10 that we had. If you didn't see the initial video, please go back and check out the original one. But this customer was having a problem with any magazines being able to fit in this. So to remedy this, our gunsmiths went in and fit all the internal components as well as the magazine latch in order for almost any magazine to work properly in this gun. So this gun's ready to go back out to the customer so he can finally make it out to the range and shoot this gun with all the available mags that he has. Gunner states, the front sight on my 1911 is broken. Now this is the follow-up video to a previous video with the Dan Wesson Heirloom 1911, and the OEM front sight with the brass bead broke. The brass bead fell out and was nowhere to be found, and the customer wanted an OEM style replacement for the slide. So because of the polished nature and the engraved slide, we had to take a little bit more care on installing this front sight than most to make sure we don't mar, scuff, or damage the dovetail or the slide itself. And as you can see here, the front sight, it is in, no damage, and it is ready for the customer to take out back to the range. Gunner states, the floor plate latch on my rifle broke. This is a follow-up video on the Harrington and Richardson 300-301 rifle that we had in previously. So if you didn't see it, go check out the initial video. But the aluminum floor plate latch sheared, which is a common problem on these guns, and you don't have any parts production for replacement on these. So we reproduced the part from scratch. As you can see here, we went through and we measured and back engineered and reproduced the part in steel this time by hand. The process of reproducing a one-off part like this can get expensive. So if you go to a local gunsmith to have this reproduced, it doesn't seem like a big job, but it can be extremely difficult and time consuming to get exactly right. So don't be shocked at the price tag that a local gunsmith might charge to one-off reproduce a part like this. So next steps for this one is to final buff, refinish the latch, and get it installed so it can be returned to the customer. Gunner states, I bent the barrel on my AK. This is a Rome Arm SAR-1. This is an older Romanian AK and really good guns, really cool looking guns. Now this customer states that his barrel was bent with improper vicing when the work was done. We're not sure who was doing the prior work, if it was a shop or if it was the customer himself, but after the work, he states that the gun barrel wouldn't hold groups anymore and he could tell on a slight bend. So he bought a replacement barrel, and this customer is wondering if we can do the removal of the bad one and the install of the new one. After inspecting the rifle and the barrel to make sure that they are compatible, all that's left is quoting it out and getting the green light from the customer to get started on the work. Gunner states, I'd like to reduce the recoil on my rifle by installing a muzzle brake. Now, this rifle is a Savage Model 16 in 300 Winchester short mag. Those of you that aren't familiar with that caliber, it is a thumper. So this customer wants a muzzle brake installed to help mitigate some of the recoil. This is a Lambda PRS 30 muzzle brake from VG6 Precision. It's a fairly large 3-port brake on here and should do very nicely to help bring some of that recoil off of the shooter's shoulder. Now, his gun did not come threaded from the factory, and one major thing you need to consider when getting a rifle threaded like this barrel does have some taper, so do we have the width to do standard threading? Now, this one, we just get away with it. We have a thick enough barrel that we can do a standard 5/8 by 24 thread, which is US standard for 30 cal rifles. So this will head back to the lathe. It will get the correct threading and target crowning, and then we'll install the muzzle brake. Gunner states, I lent my shotgun to my buddy and it came back all messed up. Now, this is a Winchester 1200. Customer brought it in pieces and said that he had lent it to a friend for a while to use for hunting, and when it returned to him, it was completely broken. Can't get it back together. And right off the bat, there's a couple obvious things just on initial look that are clearly out of whack here. So let's start. First thing you'll notice is the ejector is sticking out of the action and pretty bent. And on further looking, you'll see the ejector retention pin looks like it's walked out of the receiver and probably caused the ejector to protrude and get broken. So we at least know that we need a new ejector on this gun, possibly a new ejector retention pin, but we're going to send this back to the gunsmiths, tear it all apart, and make sure there's nothing else that needs to be replaced. So we will check back on this one and see what we need. Gunner states, I want to mount a scope to my traditional M1A rifle. This customer brought us a traditional Springfield M1A rifle, and he's looking to have a scope mount put on it. He brought us a Sadlac Industries mount, which is a little bit different than the factory Springfield mounts. It uses the interface for the stripper clip guide to give additional support and sturdiness to the mount. But it also makes it a little bit more of a difficult job than just the traditional mounts. So first we'll need to remove the stripper clip guide and then clean up and hone the groove that the scope mount sits in. Also going to have to drop the whole trigger group out in order to access a pin on the bottom side of the receiver that serves as an additional interface for the mount. So this thing is going back to the gunsmiths to start pulling pieces off and get this thing mounted up. Gunner states, my floor plate latch in my bolt action rifle has broken. Now, this is the final video for this gun. If you remember, we had a pot aluminum retention latch for the magazine floor plate that sheared. It's a common problem in these guns, and we had to reproduce it from scratch. If you check out the previous video, you'll actually see the piece by itself all reproduced, and here you're going to see it all put in the rifle and working. So this time we manufactured out of steel instead of aluminum, so this should last ages and be able to be enjoyed by the next generation. So this one is on its way back out to the customer. Gunner states, I want to mount a scope to my traditional M1A rifle. Now, this is part 2 to this project. If you haven't seen part 1, go back and watch it, where we give base details on what we are going to do. And now we're following up. So if you can see, we have now mounted the Sadlac Industries mount. We had to remove the stripper clip guide as well as the stripper clip guide pin, which requires the drop out of the full trigger assembly in order to access and remove that. After that, we cleaned and honed the groove for the stripper clip guide as it acts as a solid interface for the Sadlac mount. Lastly, we lock it in place with the guide key and set screws, and this thing is rock solid and ready to mount some optics on. Gunner states, I bent the barrel in my AK. This is the Romarm SAR-1 from the previous video. If you haven't seen it, go back and check it out. But the barrel was bent due to improper vicing. Now, our gunsmiths did check out the rifle as well as the new barrel that was provided, made sure everything was compatible. Customer green lighted the work, so they went ahead, removed the old barrel as well as all the blocks involved, and then repressed in the new barrel, head spaced it, set in the barrel pin, reinstalled the rear sight block, gas block, and front sight block, made sure everything was square and true, and and now is good to go. So this AK is back to 100% functional, accurate, and going back out to the customer. Gunner states, my AK dust cover is too difficult to remove. This is a follow-up video from the Zastava M70 that we did a video on earlier, talking about the customer having a hard time removing and installing the dust cover on the rifle, as well as the action being sluggish and slow on function. So our gunsmiths took a look at this. They did find a significant burr on the dust cover, and they removed it and fit it correctly. So now it comes on and off very easily. And internally, they took it down and they polished chamber and rails and slicked it up, and now it works very, very smooth. So back out to the customer it goes.